My brother drove 3 hours to my farm and slapped a court order on my dinner table like a death sentence. He told me I owed the family and would be evicted in 30 days while my mother stood behind him, cold as ice. But at 9 in the morning, just as the county assessor pulled up, a black SUV turned into the drive. The woman stepped out, looked right at me, and the assessor froze. "Wait," he said. "She is my client. My name is Daisy Martin." And I was exactly 3 bites into my buttered toast when the invasion began. The kitchen of my farmhouse was usually a sanctuary of silence at 7 in the morning. It was a functional silence, broken only by the hum of the commercial refrigerator in the mudroom and the low whistle of the wind coming off the valley. I liked it that way. I had built my entire life around that specific, productive quiet. But that morning, the peace shattered not with a knock, but with the distinctive, heavy thud of a car door slamming shut, followed by the crunch of expensive leather shoes on gravel. I did not have to look out the window to know who it was. The aggressive cadence of the footsteps gave them away. The front door swung open without a warning. They did not knock. They never knocked. To them, this was not my home. It was a holding cell they had graciously allowed me to occupy. Evan walked in first, my brother. He was wearing a navy blue suit that likely cost more than my pickup truck. His tie nodded with a precision that suggested he had spent more time in front of the mirror than he had reviewing his case files. Behind him came my mother, Diane. She wore her signature expression of long-suffering martyrdom. Her hands clasped tightly around a designer handbag as if she were afraid the air in my house might contaminate it. And trailing in the rear like a vulture waiting for scraps was Aunt Gloria, there to witness the carnage. They moved like a single organism, a hydra of judgment and entitlement. They did not say hello. They did not ask how I was. Evan simply marched to the heavy oak table where I sat, pulled a thick sheaf of stapled documents from his briefcase, and dropped them onto the wood. The sound was heavy, final. It sounded like a gavel strike. "It is over, Daisy," Evan said. His voice was smooth, practiced. It was his courtroom voice, the one he used when he was trying to intimidate a defendant into a plea deal. "We are done waiting." I looked at the documents. The bold text at the top was upside down from my perspective, but I could read the legal jargon well enough. Notice of foreclosure, seizure of assets, motion to liquidate. I took another bite of my toast, chewed slowly, and swallowed before looking up at him. "Good morning to you too, Evan, Mom, Gloria. Would anyone like coffee?" "Stop playing the victim," Evan snapped, his veneer of professional calm cracking just a fraction. He pulled a chair out and sat opposite me, leaning in to invade my personal space. "This failing farm is going to be auctioned off to satisfy the family debt. You have hidden out here playing farmer for 6 years, draining resources, contributing nothing. You have evaded reality long enough." My mother stepped forward then. She did not sit. She stood by the window, looking out at the yard with a look of pure disdain. "We are doing this for you, Daisy," she said. Her voice was cold, devoid of any warmth a mother should possess. It was the tone of a disappointed investor cutting losses. "You are 34 years old. You are drowning in a business that does not work. Losing everything is the only way you will learn to grow up. You need a hard reset." "A hard reset," I repeated, my voice flat. "Is that what we are calling it?" "We are calling it a mercy killing," Evan said. He tapped a manicured finger on the stack of papers. "I have filed the motion. The court has granted a preliminary review based on the outstanding obligations you owe to the estate." I set my toast down. My appetite was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. "What obligations?" "Evan, I bought this land with the money Dad gave me. The deed is in my name. I have never asked you for a cent." "Dad gave you a loan," Evan corrected, his eyes narrowing. "A loan from the family trust, a loan you have never repaid, and since you have no liquidity and this place is clearly barely functional, we are calling in the collateral." "I never signed a loan agreement," I said. I kept my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the trap finally snapping shut. I had known this day would come. I had felt it in the wind for months. Dad gave me that seed money as a gift. He told me to build something real. Dad was soft, Evan sneered, and he is not here to protect you from the real world anymore. He flipped to the third page of the document and spun it around so I could see it. And as for not signing anything, your memory must be as poor as your business sense. I looked down, there, at the bottom of a document titled Acknowledgement of Family Debt and Collateral Agreement, was a signature, Daisy Martin. I stared at it. It was a good forgery. In fact, it was better than good. It was perfect. The loop of the D, the sharp cross of the T, the way the N trailed off. It was my signature, but as I leaned in closer, studying the ink, I saw the faintest artifacting around the edges of the lines. It was subtle, something a layman would miss, but I had spent the last 6 years inspecting microscopic pests on leaves and reading fine print supply contracts. It was identical to the signature I had used on my employee handbook at Northbridge Strategy Group. 7 years ago, the exact same slant, the exact same pressure points. This is fascinating, I said, looking up at him. Where did you find this? In the files, Evan said. Too quickly. You signed it 5 years ago when you needed the cash injection for the irrigation system repairs. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending you forgot. I see, I said. I did not argue. I did not scream that it was a digital copy-paste job. I did not point out that 5 years ago, I had paid for the irrigation repairs by selling my car, not by borrowing money. I just nodded. So, that is it then. You are taking the farm. The county assessor is coming on Friday, Evan announced, sensing victory in my silence. He sat back, adjusting his cufflinks. 9 a.m, he is going to conduct a full valuation of the land and the structures. Once he establishes the base value, we will proceed to auction within 30 days. I have already lined up potential buyers who are interested in the land value. They will likely bulldoze this junk, but that is not my concern. Friday, I said. 9 a.m. Yes, Evan said. And do not try anything stupid. Daisy, no locking the gates, no hiding assets. Caleb Mercer is a serious man. He does not have time for your games, and neither do I. Gloria, my mother said, turning to my aunt. You heard all that. She has been served. Aunt Gloria nodded vigorously, clutching her purse. I heard it. Diane, poor thing. It is for the best. Really. I stood up. The movement was sudden enough that Evan flinched, just slightly. I walked over to the coffee pot and poured the rest of the contents down the sink. Okay, I said, turning to face them. Friday at 9. Evan blinked, clearly disappointed by the lack of a scene. He wanted tears. He wanted me to beg. He wanted to play the benevolent patriarch, granting me a few more days of shelter before casting me out into the cold. My acceptance robbed him of his climax. You are taking this surprisingly well, he said, his eyes searching my face for a crack. What choice do I have? I asked, leaning against the counter. You are the lawyer, Evan. You have the paperwork. You have the signature. Exactly, he said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. At least you are finally showing some pragmatism. Maybe there is hope for you yet. Let us go, my mother said, wrinkling her nose as she looked around the kitchen. The smell of fertilizer is giving me a headache. I followed them out onto the porch. The morning sun was fully up now, bathing the farm in a harsh, revealing light. To the untrained eye, to their eyes, my farm looked like a desolate wasteland. They looked at the 3 massive greenhouses stretching out to the east, their high-tech polymer skins opaque and dusty. They saw only plastic tunnels, likely filled with dying plants. They looked at the shipping container hub I had converted into a processing center and saw only rusted metal boxes. They looked at the soil, which I had spent half a decade balancing and nourishing, and saw only dirt. Look at this mess, Evan laughed, gesturing to the main greenhouse. Plastic and dirt, 6 years of your life, Daisy, and this is what you have to show for it, a few rows of wilting vegetables. It is pathetic, my mother agreed. She did not even look at me. She was looking at the horizon, perhaps imagining the warehouse complex or subdivision that would soon replace my life's work. Your father would be heartbroken if he saw how you squandered his help. That one stung. It was a calculated barb, aimed at the one soft spot I had left, but I did not flinch. I let it hit me, let it sink in, and let it fuel the fire that was currently burning a hole in my stomach. Make sure the place is presentable for Mr. Mercer, Evan called out as he walked toward his pristine silver sedan. Clean up the yard. I do not want the appraisal coming in low because you were too lazy to mow the grass. I will take care of it, I said. They got into the car. Evan revved the engine, a sound that seemed violently out of place in the valley, and sprayed gravel as he reversed out of the drive. I watched them go. I watched the dust clouds settle long after their taillights had disappeared around the bend. Only then did I allow my shoulders to drop. The silence returned, but the quality of it had changed. It was no longer the silence of peace. It was the silence of a held breath before a plunge. I turned and walked back into the house, locking the door behind me. I went straight to the master bedroom, to the closet, and knelt on the floor. I pulled up the loose floorboard in the corner. A cliché, perhaps, but effective, and retrieved the small fireproof safe I kept bolted to the subfloor. My hands were steady as I spun the dial. Left to 24, right to 10, left to 56. The heavy door clicked open. Inside, there was no cash. There were no jewels. There was only a thick manila envelope and a black USB drive. I took the envelope out first. It was worn, the edges soft from how many times I had held it, but the handwriting on the front was still bold and clear. For Daisy, when you are ready. My father had given it to me 2 weeks before his heart stopped. He had known. He had seen the way Evan looked at the land, the way my mother complained about their dwindling social status. He had known that one day the wolves would come, and that those wolves would share my last name. I opened the flap and checked the contents one more time. The letter, the bank transfer records, the original, notarized gift deed that Evan did not know existed because he had been too busy chasing ambulance chaser cases in the city to pay attention to Dad's estate planning, and the USB drive. I held it in my palm, feeling its cold weight. It contained audio files, emails, scans of documents I had quietly collected over the last 2 years as I watched my family maneuver in the shadows. I was not the victim they thought I was. I was not the failing farmer scratching a living out of the dust. They saw plastic and dirt, because that is what I wanted them to see. They did not know what was growing inside those greenhouses. They did not know about the climate control systems that rivaled university laboratories. They did not know that the rusting shipping containers housed a sterile, high-speed cold chain facility that processed some of the most expensive organic matter on the East Coast. They thought I was playing house. They did not realize I was building an empire. I stood up, closing the safe but keeping the USB and the envelope on the dresser. I reached for my phone. It was an old model. The screen cracked in the corner. Part of the camouflage I wore like a second skin. I dialed a number I had memorized but never saved in my contacts list. It rang twice. "This is Rowan," a sharp professional female voice answered. There was no hesitation, no pleasantries. She was a woman who billed her time in thousands of dollars. "It is happening," I said. "They just left. They filed for foreclosure." There was a brief pause on the other end, followed by the sound of typing. "Timeline. Friday," I said. 9 in the morning. The county assessor is coming for evaluation. "Friday," Rowan repeated. "That is tight. We have a shipment scheduled for Thursday night. Do you want me to divert it?" "No," I said, looking out the window at the greenhouses that held my true leverage. "Keep the schedule. In fact, double the volume for the Thursday pickup. I want the inventory levels at maximum capacity." "Understood," she said. "And the other matter?" "Bring the contract," I said. "The full binder, and bring the historicals. Evan is bringing the assessor to appraise a failing farm. I need you to show them what this place is actually worth." "I will be there," Rowan said. Her voice carried a hint of dark amusement. I have been waiting to meet your brother. He sounds like a charming man. He is a shark, I said, but he forgot that sharks suffocate on land. Friday at 9. Daisy, I need everything to happen on time. Do not let them delay the start. I will not, I promised. Just be ready to sign. I am always ready to sign for quality, she said, and the line went dead. I lowered the phone and looked at the empty kitchen. My toast was cold. The coffee was gone. The threat of eviction hung over the room like a physical weight, but for the first time in 6 years, I did not feel the need to hide. I looked at the spot on the table where Evan had slammed the papers down. He had wanted a war. He had wanted to strip me bare and sell me off for parts. He was about to learn a very expensive lesson about agriculture. You reap exactly what you sow. Friday, I whispered to the empty room. See you Friday? I picked up the notice of foreclosure and walked over to the trash can. I did not throw it away. Instead, I walked to the message board by the fridge and pinned it right in the center, next to my planting schedule. It was not a threat anymore. It was motivation. To understand the silence of my farm today, you have to understand the noise I left behind 6 years ago. It was a Tuesday in mid-October when I walked out of Northbridge Strategy Group for the last time. I remember the date because the air conditioning in the glass-walled high-rise was set to a bone-chilling 68 degrees, while the world outside was basking in a golden Indian summer. I had spent 4 years in that office, writing marketing copy for products I did not care about, optimizing click-through rates for diet pills and predatory loans. My soul had become a spreadsheet of engagement metrics. When I told my family at Sunday dinner that I had resigned and bought the old Miller property 3 hours north, the reaction was immediate and visceral. Evan laughed first. It was a bark of incredulity, the kind of sound one makes when a child announces they plan to fly to the moon in a cardboard box. He called it a quarter-life crisis. My mother, Diane, was less amused. She set her silverware down with a sharp clatter and told me I was being hysterical. She said I was throwing away a pension and health insurance to play in the dirt. To them, land was something you invested in for a tax write-off or developed into condos. It was not something you touched. My father, Frank, was the only one who did not speak immediately. He waited until Evan had finished listing the statistical failure rates of small businesses, and Mom had poured herself a second glass of wine to cope with the shame of having a farmer for a daughter. Later that night, as I was packing boxes in my apartment, Dad showed up. He stood in the doorway, looking older than I had realized. His shoulders slumped under the weight of a life spent keeping the peace between a narcissist wife and an ambitious, ruthless son. He handed me a check. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to buy equipment and survive the first winter. I tried to refuse, but he pressed it into my hand. His fingers were rough. A reminder that before he was a suburban dad in a sedate suit, he had been a man who worked with his hands. Make it real. Daisy. He had said, that was it. No advice on crops, no warnings about the economy, just 3 words. Do not play at this. Do not do it for show. Make it real. And then he added the part that stuck in my ribs like a hook. Let the world decide if you are right or wrong. Do not let your mother decide. Let the work decide. I took that check and I drove north. And for the first 18 months, the work decided that I was wrong. It was brutal. I had romanticized the idea of farming, picturing sun-drenched mornings and baskets of perfect tomatoes. The reality was mud, cold, and a level of exhaustion that went so deep it felt like my marrow had dissolved. I started with open-field crops, because that was what the neighbors did. I planted 3 acres of heritage corn and an acre of heirloom peppers. The corn got a fungal blight that turned the stalks into gray, weeping mush in the span of 48 hours. The peppers were eaten by a swarm of aphids that seemed to materialize out of the ether. I spent my savings on organic pesticides that did nothing but make the bugs shiny. I tried to sell what little I harvested at the local farmers market. I stood there for 6 hours every Saturday, watching people walk past my slightly misshapen vegetables to buy glossy, wax-coated produce from the big distributors who pretended to be local. I barely made enough to cover the gas money. The locals, old men in battered trucks who had been farming since the Truman administration, watched me with a mixture of pity and scorn. To them, I was just a city girl LARPing as a peasant, waiting for the first hard freeze to send me running back to the heating vents of corporate America. I almost did run back. There was a night in that second winter when the pipes froze and I was huddled under 3 blankets, staring at a bank account balance that had dipped into the double digits. I could hear Evan's voice in my head, smug and vindicated, but then I remembered the data. I was not a traditional farmer. I was a data analyst who happened to be covered in mud. I sat down and looked at the numbers. The traditional model high volume, low margin, dependent on weather was a suicide pact for a solo operator on small acreage. I could not compete with the industrial giants on corn or soy. I was trying to play their game with a broken bat, so I stopped. I stopped trying to feed the town and decided to feed the few. I spent the next 4 months doing nothing but reading. I read agronomy journals from the Netherlands. I read white papers on hydroponic nutrient density. I researched supply chains for high-end hospitality groups. I realized there was a gap in the market, a razor-thin slice where demand exceeded supply by 1,000% ultra-specific, lab-grade aromatics, and garnish greens for Michelin-starred kitchens. These chefs did not want a truckload of corn. They wanted a specific strain of lemon verbena that only grew in a certain humidity range. They wanted wasabi arugula, harvested at exactly 3 inches of height, delivered within 4 hours of cutting, with 0 bruising. I pivoted hard. I stopped farming the fields. I let the back 40 acres go to meadow, which only fueled the neighbors' gossip that I had given up. Instead, I focused on the infrastructure. I used the last of Dad's money to buy 3 used shipping containers and a derelict greenhouse frame. I rebuilt them myself. I learned to weld from YouTube videos, burning my arms and blinding myself with the arc flash until I got the bead right. I wired the electrical systems, terrified I would burn the place down, double-checking every connection with a multimeter until I dreamed in circuit diagrams. I installed hospital-grade air filtration and water purification systems. It was no longer a farm. It was a biological laboratory. I grew things that had no business growing in this climate. I grew micro-orchids for plating desserts. I grew a Japanese shiso pepper that retailed for $80 a pound. But growing it was only half the battle. The real work, the work that saved me, was the cold chain. I realized that for my target clients, quality was synonymous with consistency. If a chef put a dish on the menu, he needed the ingredient to look and taste exactly the same on Tuesday as it did on Saturday. I turned one of the shipping containers into a processing hub. I lined the walls with food-safe PVC, installed stainless steel tables, and built a blast chiller. I developed a tracking system. Every tray of seeds got a QR code. I logged the planting date, the soil pH, the nutrient mix, the harvest time, and the temperature of the delivery van at 15-minute intervals. I became obsessive. I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. I had no social life. I had no friends in the area. My world shrank to the size of a leaf. I spoke to no one but my plants and, eventually, the buyers. And that was the key. The silence. I did not post pictures of my perfect, jeweled produce on Instagram. I did not invite the local paper to do a puff piece on the woman revitalizing local agriculture. Publicity was a liability. If people knew what I was growing, they would try to copy it, or steal it, or regulate it. I approached my first client, a sous chef at a resort 2 hours away, with a cooler full of samples and a binder full of data. He tasted a single leaf of sorrel, looked at my temperature logs, and signed a standing order on the spot. Word spread, but it spread through back channels. It was a whisper network of executive chefs and procurement directors. They passed my contact info along like a state secret. I became a ghost in the industry. I was the supplier you called when you needed perfection, and you needed it guaranteed. My family knew none of this. They visited perhaps twice a year. They would park in the driveway, look at the overgrown fields I was ignoring, and shake their heads. They saw the opaque plastic of the greenhouses and assumed I was hiding a small, sad crop of tomatoes. They saw the shipping containers and assumed I was hoarding junk. I never corrected them. When Evan asked how things were going, I would shrug and say, "It is a struggle. It keeps the lights on." I watched the satisfaction settle over his face. He needed me to be struggling. My failure was the ballast that kept his ego afloat. If I was the mess, then he was the success. If I was the charity case, he was the benefactor. It was a role he was comfortable with, and I let him play it because it bought me peace. Then, 2 years ago, Dad died. It was a massive coronary event. He was gone before he hit the floor. The funeral was a blur of black wool and insincere condolences. I stood by the grave, feeling a loneliness so profound it felt like physical hypoxia. He was the only one who knew. He was the only one who had ever visited the farm and actually looked inside the greenhouse. He had seen the rows of thriving, exotic green, and he had wept, just a little, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He had told me he was proud. After the funeral, I saw the shift in my mother and Evan. The grief did not soften them. It sharpened them. They began to talk about consolidating assets and trimming the fat. I realized then that my father had been the dam holding back their greed. With him gone, I was exposed. I went back to the farm, and I began to prepare. I took every document Dad had ever given me: the letter, the initial check record, the emails where he encouraged me, and I locked them away. I stopped bringing any paperwork into the main house. I moved my office into the back of the processing container, behind a heavy steel door with a biometric lock. I became a phantom on my own land. To the outside world, to the county tax assessor, to my neighbors, and especially to my brother. Daisy Martin was a recluse living on a failing farm, scratching out a poverty-level existence. But inside the perimeter, behind the plastic walls and steel doors, I was running a precision engine. The farm today looks silent because efficiency does not make noise. There are no tractors roaring at dawn because I do not till the soil. There are no hired hands shouting across the fields because I automated the irrigation and climate control. But if you stood in the driveway at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday, you would see the reality. You would see the unmarked white vans backing up to the loading dock. You would see the drivers, uniformed and professional, loading insulated crates with the efficiency of a pit crew. You would see digital manifests being signed, transferring tens of thousands of dollars of inventory in minutes. My calendar is not empty. It is a Tetris block of harvest windows and delivery slots, booked out 6 weeks in advance. I have a waiting list of restaurants that would kill to get onto my rotation. I stand in the center of my operation, surrounded by the hum of cooling fans and the drip of nutrient solutions, and I am not lonely. I am solitary. There is a difference. Loneliness is a void. Solitude is a shield. I built this. I built it with my own hands, my own sweat, and my own silence. And the irony is, my family thinks they are coming to take away a piece of dirt. They have no idea they are walking into a fortress. They see a woman who has lost her way. They do not see the CEO of a ghost enterprise. And that blindness is going to be their downfall, to the untrained eye. A farm is a place of biology. It is sun, soil, rain, and luck. But to me, and to the people who pay my invoices, a farm is a place of data. It is a controlled environment where variables are eliminated until only perfection remains. Evan and my mother looked at my property and saw a hobby gone wrong. They saw a woman playing in the dirt. What they failed to understand was that I was not in the business of selling vegetables. I was in the business of selling risk mitigation and culinary precision. My operation was built around a single, ironclad concept: the chain of custody. When a head of lettuce leaves a standard commercial farm, it goes into a bin, then onto a truck, then to a distribution center, then to a wholesaler, and finally to a restaurant. By the time it hits the plate, it has been handled by a dozen people, exposed to fluctuating temperatures, and its origin has been blurred into a generic product of the USA label. My clients could not afford that ambiguity. My anchor client was Marrow and Slate Hospitality, To the general public, they were a luxury brand of boutique hotels and high-concept restaurants scattered across the eastern seaboard. To me, they were a partner who demanded absolute excellence and paid a premium that would make a corn farmer weep. Our relationship was not based on charity. It was based on a contract so thick it could stop a bullet. I did not just send them boxes of greens. I sent them edible flowers harvested with tweezers to ensure no petal was bruised. I sent them micro cilantro that had been grown in a hydroponic medium specifically balanced to enhance the essential oils, creating a flavor profile 5 times more intense than the field-grown variety. But the real product was the assurance. Every single crate that left my loading dock carried a unique QR code. When a chef at a marrow and slate restaurant scanned that code, they did not just get a packed-on date, they got a full dossier. They could see the exact time of harvest. They could see the water quality report for that specific grow cycle, proving there were no heavy metals or bacterial contaminants. They could see the soil composition analysis. They could see the temperature log of the delivery van, proving the cold chain had never been broken, not even for a minute. This was why I had a waiting list. It was not arrogance, it was capacity. My greenhouse space was finite. I currently had a list of chefs and restaurant groups waiting between 12 and 18 months just for a consultation to see if I could fit them into the rotation. I had turned down offers from major grocery chains because they wanted volume. I did not do volume, I did value. Keeping this hidden from my family had been a deliberate strategic choice, but it was also a necessity for the business. In the world of high-end agriculture, privacy is currency. My clients often wanted to claim they foraged their ingredients or sourced them from their own private gardens. I was happy to let them have the glory. I was a white label service. My name did not appear on their menus. I did not tag them in social media posts because I did not have social media accounts. I operated under a strict non-disclosure agreement structure. In my public tax filings, I redacted the names of my clients, listing them only as contracted entities, which was perfectly legal under the trade secret provisions of the state tax code. To anyone looking at the surface like my brother Evan, my income looked erratic. I reinvested almost 90% of my revenue back into the infrastructure. I bought better lights, more efficient pumps, and advanced sensors. My taxable income remained modest, deliberately so. I lived simply. My truck was 10 years old. My clothes were functional. I did not look like a woman running a multi-million-dollar logistics operation. I looked like a struggling farmer. And that camouflage had worked perfectly. Until now. I sat in my secure office at the back of the processing container, the hum of the servers keeping me company. On the screen in front of me was the digital copy of the loan agreement Evan had slapped on my kitchen table. I zoomed in on the signature again. It was a clumsy job. Really, the more I looked at it, the more offended I was. Not just by the fraud, but by the laziness of it. The pixelation on the curvature of the D suggested it had been lifted from a document scanned at a low resolution, likely 300 dots per inch or less. But the real tell was the date. The document was dated August 15th, 5 years ago. I pulled up my own internal logs for that date. 5 years ago, on August 15th, I had been in the middle of a crisis. A heat wave had threatened to overwhelm the cooling system in Greenhouse 1. I had spent 18 straight hours manually monitoring the misting system. I had not signed a loan document. I had not even held a pen. I had been holding a wrench and a temperature probe. Furthermore, I had a distinct habit that Evan did not know about. Starting 6 years ago, on the advice of my remote legal counsel, a sharp-witted attorney named Sarah, who worked out of Chicago and communicated exclusively via encrypted email, I had adopted a specific protocol for signing legal documents. I always, without exception, placed a tiny, almost invisible dot inside the loop of the Y in my first name when signing anything with financial implications. It was a personal authenticator, a habit born of paranoia that was now paying dividends. The signature on Evan's document did not have the dot. It was a copy of my signature from my employment contract at Northbridge, a document I had signed 7 years ago, before I developed my security protocols. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, the anger cooling into a hard, Crystalline resolve. They were trying to steal the land. That was obvious. But why now? And why were they so confident I switched tabs on my computer and pulled up the county's GIS map? I overlaid my property lines with the hydrological survey data I had commissioned 3 years ago. This was the secret that even Marrow and Slate did not know. This was the true value of the failing farm. When I bought the land, the previous owner had been an old man who had neglected the fields but had been obsessive about paperwork. In the 1970s, he had secured a senior water right permit for the deep aquifer that ran beneath the valley. In our state, water rights were separate from land rights. They were gold dust. Most of the farms in the valley were on junior permits, meaning that in a drought year, they could be cut off by the state. But my permit was senior. It was grandfathered in. I had the legal right to draw a specific volume of water, regardless of drought conditions, and crucially, the permit allowed for commercial and industrial use, not just agricultural. I looked at the map. The aquifer ran deep and pure right under my main greenhouse. Evan and his investors did not want to grow corn. They did not even want to build condos. I suspected they wanted the water, or perhaps they wanted to lease the land for a solar farm or a logistics hub, both of which required guaranteed water access for cooling and fire suppression systems. If they foreclosed on me, if they seized the land for unpaid debts, they would get the water rights along with the deed. They would get an asset worth 10 times the value of the surface dirt. I closed the map. I could have called Evan right then. I could have sent him a picture of the forgery and threatened to go to the police. I could have called my mother and screamed at her for her betrayal. But that is what the old Daisy would have done. The emotional Daisy. The sister who wanted to be understood. That Daisy was gone. The woman who sat in this office was a CEO. And a CEO does not complain about a hostile takeover attempt. She kills it. I picked up my phone and dialed Sarah in Chicago. "I need you to draft a document," I said when she answered. "I need an affidavit of forgery, prepared for submission to the court. But do not file it yet. I want it ready to hand over physically." "You want to ambush them," Sarah said. She knew me well. "Evan is bringing the county assessor on Friday," I explained. "He thinks he is going to walk through a desolate, failing farm and get a lowball valuation that justifies a quick auction. He thinks he is going to humiliate me and take the keys." "And you are going to show him the books," Sarah surmised. "I am going to show him everything," I said. "I am going to show the assessor the Marrow and Slate contract. I am going to show him the water rights permit. I am going to show him the infrastructure investment logs." "Daisy," Sarah warned, her voice cautious, "if you do that, your property taxes are going to skyrocket. You will be reclassified from standard agricultural to high-intensity commercial production. The valuation will triple, maybe quadruple." "I know," I said. "That is the point. If the farm was worth $4 million instead of $400,000, the debt Evan claimed I owed, which was likely in the range of $50,000 or $60,000, would look ridiculous as a justification for foreclosure. A judge would never grant a total seizure of a multi-million-dollar operational business to satisfy a minor, disputed debt. They would order a payment plan or a lien, not an eviction. By proving I was rich, or at least that my business was incredibly valuable, I would make it impossible for them to steal it." "And the forgery?" Sarah asked. "That is the cherry on top," I said. "I will let the assessor establish the value first. I want Evan to hear the number. I want him to realize that he is trying to foreclose on a gold mine. And then, once the greed is really shining in his eyes, I will drop the forgery charge." "It is high risk," Sarah noted. "You are exposing your entire operation. You lose your anonymity." "I lost my anonymity the moment they walked into my kitchen this morning," I replied. "Now I am just controlling the narrative." I hung up the phone and looked around my office. It was time to prepare the stage. I needed to clean, not the way my mother meant, with a broom and a dustpan. I needed to clean the data. I needed to print the binders. I needed to organize the water quality reports, the soil tests, the harvest logs. I opened the safe and took out the deed to the water rights. The paper was yellowed and brittle. It looked like trash. It was worth more than Evan's entire law practice. I also needed to make a call to Rowan at Marrow and Slate. I needed her physical presence. A document was one thing. A flesh and blood executive stepping out of a luxury car was another. Evan was a snob. He respected money and power. He would dismiss me, but he would not be able to dismiss a woman who wore suits sharper than his own. I typed out a text to Rowan. Friday is a go. Bring the full procurement file. And wear the shark suit. She replied instantly with a thumbs-up emoji. I stood up and walked out of the office, locking the steel door behind me. I walked through the processing facility. My staff had gone home for the day. The stainless steel tables were gleaming. The air smelled of ozone and sanitizer. I walked into the main greenhouse. It was twilight outside, but inside, the supplemental LED lights had hummed to life, bathing the rows of rare herbs in a soft, violet glow. I walked down the central aisle, running my hand along the waist-high troughs. I stopped at a tray of shiso. The leaves were perfect, serrated edges sharp against the light, a deep, rich purple that looked almost black. "You are not going anywhere," I whispered to them. My family thought they were dealing with a desperate woman holding on to the past. They thought they were cutting a dead branch off the family tree. They were about to discover that they were trying to cut down a sequoia with a pocket knife. Friday was coming, and for the first time in my life, I was looking forward to a family reunion. The moment Evan's taillights disappeared, I did not go back to the greenhouse. I went straight to my office and locked the door. The emotional hit of seeing my family had faded, replaced by the cold, vibrating hum of adrenaline. I was not a sister anymore. I was an investigator, and my brother was the suspect. I sat down at my desk and woke up my workstation. It was a high-powered setup, 3 monitors usually dedicated to climate metrics and supply chain logistics. Today, they were dedicated to war. I logged into the county clerk's online portal. Accessing public court records was a skill I had picked up during my first year of business when I had to vet potential suppliers. I typed in the case number Evan had carelessly left visible on the top sheet. The file loaded. Martin Estate Vi. Daisy Martin. I skipped the motion for summary judgment and went straight to the exhibits. Evan was a lawyer who relied on paperwork to intimidate, but paperwork leaves a trail. I scrolled down to Exhibit B, the document titled Familial Debt Guarantee and Asset Collateralization Agreement. There it was, the smoking gun. It was a single page, dense with legalese about shared familial burden and retroactive compounding interest. It claimed I had agreed to underwrite a loan taken out by the Martin Family Trust 5 years ago, and at the bottom, there was my signature. I pulled up the high-resolution scan on the center monitor, on the left monitor. I opened my personal archive folder titled Northbridge Strategy Group, HR Exit Docs. I knew that signature. I knew it intimately because I had stared at it for 4 years. I opened a PDF titled Employee Handbook Acknowledgement 2017. I zoomed in on the signature block. It was a match, and I do not mean it looked similar. I mean it was mathematically identical. Human beings do not sign their names the exact same way twice. There is always a micro variation, a slightly wider loop on the Y, a sharper cross on the T, a difference in pen pressure. But when I overlaid the signature from Evan's court filing onto the signature from my old HR document, they lined up pixel for pixel. There was a tiny artifact, a microscopic jagged edge on the upstroke of the capital M, caused by a speck of dust on the scanner bed at Northbridge 7 years ago. That same speck of dust was present on the document Evan claimed I signed 5 years ago in his office. He had not just forged my signature, he had lifted it. He had likely gone through my old files stored in my parents' attic, found a document with a clean signature, scanned it, and photoshopped it onto this fabrication. "Got you," I whispered. But knowing it was a forgery was not enough. I had to prove it in a way that would hold up in a courtroom. Against a lawyer who played golf with half the judges in the county, I picked up my phone and dialed a number in the state capitol. Forensic Document Services. This is Arthur. A gravelly voice answered. "Arthur, it is Daisy Martin," I said. "I have a job for you. Rush status. I need a comparative analysis of a digital signature against a known exemplar. I suspect a cut-and-paste manipulation. Daisy, Arthur said. We had worked together once before when a seed supplier tried to claim I had signed off on a subpar delivery. Send me the files. If it is digital manipulation, I can usually spot the pixel degradation around the insertion point within an hour. I am sending them now, I said. I need a sworn affidavit by Thursday night. Can you do it? For double my rate. I can do anything, he grunted. Bill me, I said, and hit send on the email. With the forgery defense in motion, I turned my attention to the bigger question why Evan was arrogant. But he was not stupid. Forging a signature on a court document was a felony. It was disbarment territory. He would only take a risk that massive if the alternative was catastrophic. He did not just want to kick me off the land to teach me a lesson about growing up. That was the narrative for Mom. Evan needed something else. He needed money. I opened a new browser window and navigated to the state's Uniform Commercial Code database. If Evan or Mom had taken out loans using the family trust as leverage, there would be a UCC filing. I searched for Martin Family Trust. Nothing recent. Just the old mortgage on the parents' house which was paid off years ago. I searched Evan Martin. Nothing but a car lease. Then I paused. Evan liked to think of himself as a venture capitalist. He was always talking about diversifying portfolios. I searched for business entities registered to him. I found 3 dissolved LLCs, and then one that was active Apex Horizon Holdings, LLC. I ran a UCC search on Apex Horizon Holdings. The screen filled with red flags. 6 months ago, Apex Horizon Holdings had taken out a massive, high-interest bridge loan from a private equity lender, the kind of lender you go to when the banks say no. The principal was $750,000. The collateral listed was anticipated real estate liquidations. I dug deeper into the LLC's filings. Evan was the managing member, but my mother, Diane, was listed as a silent partner. I cross-referenced the dates. 6 months ago was right around the time a local startling news story broke about a luxury coastal development project 2 counties over that had collapsed due to environmental zoning violations. The developers had filed for bankruptcy, leaving investors with nothing. I sat back, the pieces clicking into place. They had invested in the coastal development. They had likely leveraged everything they had: Mom's retirement, Evan's savings, maybe even a line of credit against Mom's house, thinking it was a sure thing. The project imploded. Now the private equity sharks were circling, demanding their $750,000, and my family was broke. They did not want to sell my farm to pay off family debt. They wanted to sell my farm to pay off their gambling losses. But a failing farm is not worth $750,000. The land value alone, as agricultural zoning, was maybe $200,000. That would not even cover a third of their debt. So why were they so sure this would save them? I went back to the map. I looked at my property again. I looked at the surrounding area. 2 miles south, a new highway interchange was being built. I had ignored it because it did not affect my shipping routes. But now, looking at the satellite view, I saw the pattern. Large rectangles of land along the highway corridor had been bought up in the last year. I hovered over the parcels. Logistics 1 Inc., Sunray Energy Corp., Distribution East LLC, warehouses, and solar farms. The valley was transitioning. My farm was flat. It had direct road access, and crucially, it had the senior water rights. A solar farm needs massive amounts of water for panel cleaning. A logistics center needs water for fire suppression systems. If my land was sold as a turnkey agricultural site, it was worth peanuts. But if it was sold as a commercial development site with attached senior water rights, it was easily worth over $1 million. Evan had a buyer lined up. I was sure of it. He probably had a letter of intent sitting in his briefcase right now from one of these logistics companies. He was going to foreclose on me for a fake debt, seize the title, and then flip the land to the developers for a massive profit, paying off his bridge loan and keeping the change. He was not just evicting me, he was brokering me. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest, distinct from the hot anger of the morning. This was better. Rage is messy. This was calculation. I needed to confirm the buyer. I went to the County Planning Commission's agenda for the upcoming month. There, Buried in the preliminary hearing section was an item petition for zoning variance, Parcel 404. Parcel 404 was my farm. The petitioner was Apex Horizon Holdings. The application was to rezone the land from agricultural to light industrial. He had filed the zoning petition before he even owned the land. The arrogance was breathtaking. He was so sure I would fold, so sure I was the weak, incompetent little sister, that he had already started the paperwork to pave over my greenhouses. I printed the zoning petition. I printed the UCC filings showing his massive debt. I printed the forensic analysis request. I had the motive. I had the method. Now I needed the execution. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 2 p.m. on Wednesday. The assessor was coming Friday at 9. I needed to make sure the trap was inescapable. I picked up my phone again. This time, I texted Rowan directly. Change of plans. I do not just need the contract. I need you here in person. Friday, 8:45 a.m. Park behind the processing shed so they do not see you immediately. Her reply came 3 bubbles later. Is this a rescue mission or a hostile takeover? It is an ambush, I typed back. And bring the corporate seal. We might need to notarize an addendum on site. On my way, she replied. Do I need to wear the intimidating heels? Wear the ones that sound like a gavel hitting the floor? I wrote. I set the phone down. I spent the rest of the afternoon assembling the binder. I found an old, battered 3-ring binder in the supply closet. I wanted it to look innocuous. Inside, I placed the documents in a specific order, like a deck of cards stacked for a magic trick. First, the water rights deed, the original, yellowed paper. Second, the forensic report on the signature which Arthur would email me by tomorrow. Third, the evidence of Evan's secret debt and the zoning petition. Fourth, the marrow and slate contract, with the revenue figures highlighted in yellow. Fifth, a printout of my bank statement from the business account, showing a cash reserve that could buy Evan's car 10 times over. I would not show this binder to Evan, not at first. I would show it to Caleb Mercer, the county assessor. Caleb was a by-the-book bureaucrat. I knew his reputation. He hated drama. He hated liars. And he hated being used. If Evan tried to use Caleb as a pawn in his fraud, Caleb would be the one to shut it down. I checked the security cameras one last time. The farm was quiet. The wind was blowing through the valley, rattling the loose plastic on the dummy greenhouse I kept near the road for appearances. Let them think it is failing. I thought, let them think the plastic is torn and the soil is dead. I walked to the window and looked out at the long driveway. Come on, Evan, I said softly. Come and take it. I went back to the kitchen, made a fresh pot of coffee, and sat down to wait. The waiting was the hardest part, but I had learned patience from the plants. You plant the seed, you control the environment, and then you wait for the inevitable growth. This Friday, I was going to harvest the truth, and it was going to be bitter. Friday morning arrived with the sky so clear and hard it looked like a sheet of blue glass. It was the kind of unforgiving light that exposed every flaw, every crack in the paint, every weed in the gravel. For a failing farm, this would have been a disaster. For me, it was stage lighting. I was standing on the porch at 8:30, holding a mug of black coffee, when the first car arrived. It was Evan. Of course, he was early. He pulled his silver sedan up to the front gate, ignoring the biosecurity control point, "Do not enter" sign I had posted 3 years ago. He drove right up to the house, his tires grinding the gravel with an entitlement that set my teeth on edge. He stepped out, and I had to stifle a laugh. He was wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit, Italian leather shoes that cost more than my first tractor, and a silk tie. He looked like he was heading to a merger meeting on Wall Street, not a foreclosure inspection in a muddy valley. My mother and Aunt Gloria climbed out of the back seat. They were dressed in what I could only describe as funeral casual. Dark cardigans, sensible slacks, and expressions of somber anticipation. They looked like they were here to identify a body, not appraise a business. "You are early," I said, not moving from the porch. "We wanted to do a preliminary sweep," Evan said, adjusting his cuffs. He walked up the steps, bypassing me to look out over the yard. Make sure you have not stripped the copper wiring out of the walls before the assessor gets here. Good morning to you too, Mother, I said. Diane looked at me, her eyes sweeping over my work clothes, clean jeans and a Northbridge Strategy Group fleece I had kept from my old life. You look tired, Daisy. The stress must be terrible. I slept fine, I lied. Better than you, I imagine. Do not be snippy, Gloria chirped, clutching her purse. We are here to support you through the transition. Transition, I repeated. Is that what we are calling eviction these days? Evan ignored me. He turned his attention to my foreman, Marcus, who was walking from the machine shed to the main greenhouse carrying a calibration tablet. Marcus was a 26-year-old horticulture PhD candidate who worked for me part-time, but to Evan, he was just a hired hand. Hey, you, Evan shouted, snapping his fingers. You can leave that tool there. We are going to be locking up the shed in about an hour. No need to pretend you are working. Marcus stopped, looked at Evan, then looked at me. I gave him a subtle nod. Marcus adjusted his glasses, turned his back on Evan without a word, and continued walking toward the greenhouse. Insolent, Evan muttered. I will have him off the payroll by noon. He is not on a payroll you control. Evan, I said. Not yet. Evan smiled. It was a shark's smile, all teeth and dead eyes. But give it 30 days. At exactly 9 a.m, a white county sedan turned off the main road. The change in Evan was instantaneous. He smoothed his jacket, checked his watch, and assumed a posture of benevolent authority. He walked down the steps to greet the car before the engine had even cut out. Caleb Mercer stepped out of the vehicle. I had researched Caleb, just as I researched everyone. He was 55, a career civil servant who had started as a land surveyor. He was known for being meticulous, humorless, and utterly immune to charm. He wore a windbreaker with the county seal and carried a clipboard that looked like it had seen battle. Mr. Mercer, Evan boomed, extending a hand. Evan Martin, I am the attorney representing the estate. Thank you for coming out so promptly. We are eager to get this valuation processed so we can move forward with the liquidation. Caleb looked at Evan's hand, then shook it briefly. A single pump of obligation. Mr. Martin, I am here to perform a tax assessment and asset valuation pursuant to the court order. I am not here to discuss liquidation timelines. Of course, Evan said, falling into step beside him. I just wanted to give you the context. It is a simple case. Distressed agricultural asset, non-operational for several years. Significant dilapidation. We are looking at land value minus demolition costs, essentially. Caleb stopped walking. He pulled a pen from his pocket and clicked it. I will determine what I'm looking at. Mr. Martin, that is why the county pays me. He turned to me. You are the owner of Record Daisy Martin. I am, I said, stepping forward. I need access to all structures, the utility mains, and the pump house, Caleb said. Do you have the keys? The facility is unlocked, I said. But I will need you to put on boot covers before entering the greenhouses. We maintain a sterile environment. Evan laughed. It was a loud, barking sound. Sterile environment, Mr. Mercer? My sister likes to play pretend. It is just plastic tunnels and dirt. You do not need boot covers. Caleb looked at Evan, then back at me. If the operator requests biosecurity protocols, I follow them. It is standard procedure. He opened his trunk and took out a pair of plastic boot covers. He slipped them over his work boots with practiced ease. Evan watched, his face reddening slightly. He clearly felt silly standing there in his Italian loafers, being told what to do by the people he was supposed to be evicting. Fine, Evan snapped. Let us get this over with. We walked to Greenhouse 1. From the outside, it looked like a standard polyethylene tunnel. But as we stepped into the airlock, a small vestibule with positive pressure fans to blow off dust and insects, the atmosphere changed. The inner door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. We stepped inside, and the world shifted from the stark, cold morning to a warm, humid, violet-lit cathedral of green. The silence was replaced by the low, rhythmic thrum of the nutrient pumps and the whisper of the circulation fans. Rows of hydroponic troughs stretched out for 200 feet, floating on waist-high racks. There was no dirt. There were no weeds. There was only a sea of perfect, identical plants, red-veined sorrel on the left, microbasil on the right, growing in rock-wool cubes, their roots dangling into the nutrient mist below. Caleb Mercer stopped 3 feet inside the door. He did not speak. He looked up at the ceiling, where the retractable thermal screens were adjusting automatically to the morning sun. He looked down at the floor, which was white epoxy, spotless enough to eat off of. He looked at the sensors dangling every 10 feet, measuring humidity, temperature, and CO2 levels. He took his pen and wrote something on his clipboard. He wrote for a long time. "Well," Evan said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "It is neat, I will give you that. Daisy, you kept it tidy. But let us be honest. Mr. Mercer, these are temporary structures, depreciating assets. They do not add real value to the land." Caleb ignored him. He walked over to the main control panel on the wall. It was a touchscreen interface, currently displaying a complex graph of nutrient uptake rates. "This is a Hugendorn climate computer," Caleb said. It was not a question. "Yes," I said. "ISII version 4, integrated with the irrigation units." Caleb nodded. "I have only seen these at the University Research Center. You are running a fully automated loop." 95% automated, I replied. "We manually calibrate the pH sensors twice a week." Wait, Evan interrupted, waving his hand as if swatting away a fly. "Computer loops. Who cares? It is a thermostat. Mr. Mercer, let us not overcomplicate this. We are talking about the land value. The comps in this area are selling for roughly $4,000 an acre for grazing land." Caleb turned slowly to face my brother. The assessor's expression was mild, but his eyes were sharp. "Mr. Martin," Caleb said, "I do not know what kind of law you practice, but in my line of work, we do not price a semiconductor factory as a storage shed just because they both have concrete floors. This is not grazing land. This is a high-intensity controlled environment agriculture facility." "It is a greenhouse," Evans sputtered. "It is plastic." "It is infrastructure," Caleb corrected. "And judging by the conduit running along that wall, there is a significant power upgrade involved. Did you pull permits for a 3-phase upgrade?" He was asking me. "Yes," I said. 2 years ago, 400 amps. 400 amps, Caleb repeated, writing it down. "And the water, you are running hydroponics. You must be pulling heavy from the well." "We have a dedicated line," I said, "and a filtration unit in the next shed." "Let us see it," Caleb said. We moved to the processing shed. This was the shipping container complex Evan had mocked as rusty boxes. I punched the code into the keypad. The heavy steel door swung open. Inside, it was 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The walls were lined with food-grade PVC. Stainless steel tables gleamed under bright LED inspection lights. In the corner, the blast chiller hummed. On the far wall, the reverse osmosis water filtration system, a beast of chrome and tubes that cost more than Evan's car, was silently purifying the aquifer water. My mother, who had been silent until now, wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself. "It is freezing in here, and it smells like a hospital. It is a packing facility. Mrs. Martin," Caleb said. He was walking around the filtration unit, inspecting the serial plates. "Commercial grade, NSF certified." He turned to Evan. "You listed this property in your motion as non-operational and dilapidated." Evan loosened his tie. He was sweating, despite the cold. "Well, operational is a subjective term. Just because the lights are on does not mean it is a business. She is probably growing these weeds for her own amusement. There is no revenue. It is a hobby. A very expensive, wasteful hobby that has drained the family trust. I am not seeing a hobby, Caleb said, tapping his clipboard. I am seeing a capital investment in the mid-six figures. Conservatively, if this equipment is paid for, the asset value alone pushes this assessment well out of the bracket for a standard foreclosure auction. It is all debt, Evan insisted, his voice rising. She bought all this on credit. It is all leveraged. That is why we are here, to sell it off and pay the creditors. That is a matter for the bankruptcy court, Caleb said calmly. My job is to say what it is worth, and it is worth a hell of a lot more than $4,000 an acre. He turned to me. Ms. Martin, to finalize the valuation of the business enterprise value, which I now have to do, given the complexity I need to see your operating permits, water withdrawal logs, and your customer contracts. Contracts, Evan scoffed. She sells at the farmer's market. Mr. Mercer, she sells baggies of lettuce to hipsters for $5. There are no contracts. I need to verify the revenue stream, Caleb insisted, looking at me. Do you have a ledger? I do, I said. I demand to see it. Evan stepped forward, physically inserting himself between me and the assessor. As the representative of the primary creditor, I have a right to audit the financials immediately. If there is money hidden in this business, it belongs to the estate. I looked at Evan. He was desperate. He could see the failing farm narrative crumbling, and he was terrified that Caleb was about to put a valuation on the paper that would make his $750,000 debt look like pocket change. If the farm was worth millions, he could not simply seize it. He would have to sell it at fair market value, and any surplus would come back to me. He needed it to be worthless so he could steal it. You do not have a right to anything, Evan, I said, my voice steady. You are the plaintiff. You are suing me. You do not get to rifle through my proprietary business data just because you are losing the argument. I am your brother, he shouted, the mask slipping completely. And I am the executor of the trust you stole from. Show me the books. Daisy, I know you are cooking them. Mr. Martin, step back, Caleb warned, his voice dropping an octave. This is an assessment, not a deposition. She is defrauding the court. Evan pointed a shaking finger at me. She is sitting on assets she hid from the family. This proves she acted in bad faith. The only thing this proves, I said, is that you did not do your due diligence. I want those records. Evan lunged toward the office door at the back of the shed. Evan, stop, Mom cried out, looking truly alarmed for the first time. But he did not stop. He reached for the handle of the office door. It was locked. He rattled it, turning back to me with a face twisted by rage. Open it now. No, I said. Mr. Mercer, order her to open it, Evan screamed. I do not have that authority, Caleb said, looking at Evan with open disgust. But I will note your behavior in my report. The tension in the cold room was brittle, ready to snap. Evan was panting, his face red. Mom was wringing her hands. Caleb was writing furiously. And then, we heard it, the sound of tires on gravel, heavy tires. We all turned toward the open loading dock door, a black SUV, sleek and polished, rolled into the yard. It did not park in the visitor spot. It pulled right up to the loading ramp, blocking the sunlight. The engine cut. The driver's door opened. A woman stepped out. She was tall, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that made Evans look like a costume. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She carried a thick leather portfolio under one arm. She did not look at the mud on her shoes. She did not look at the greenhouses. She looked straight at Evan. It was the look a biologist gives a specimen in a jar. Who is this? Evan demanded, though his voice wavered. We are in the middle of a legal proceeding. This is private property. Rowan Pike walked up the ramp, her heels clicking on the metal with a sound like a gavel striking a sounding block. She stopped 3 feet from Evan, towering over him in her stilettos. Actually, she said, her voice cool and smooth as glass, I believe you are trespassing on my supply chain. She turned to me and gave a microscopic nod. Daisy, I hope I am not late. Right on time, I said. Caleb Mercer stepped forward, squinting slightly as he adjusted his glasses. He looked at the woman, then at the logo on the file she was holding. He froze. Wait a minute, Caleb said, his professional demeanor cracking for the first time. Ms. Pike, Rowan turned to him, her expression softening into professional recognition. Mr. Mercer, good to see you again. I trust you received the tax remittance for the downtown hotel property. Yes, last week, Caleb stammered. He looked from Rowan to me, and then back to Rowan. You know Ms. Martin? Know her. Rowan raised an eyebrow. She is the most critical vendor in our portfolio. She turned back to Evan, who was looking between them like a man watching a tennis match he did not understand. I am Rowan Pike, she said, introducing herself to my brother as if she were speaking to a slow child. Director of Procurement for Marrow and Slate Hospitality, and I am here to inspect my inventory, so if you would kindly step away from the loading dock, you are blocking my workflow. Evan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The trap had not just sprung, it had shattered his leg. The silence in the cold storage room was absolute. It was the kind of vacuum that occurs when a grenade lands in the center of a room and everyone stares at it, waiting for the pin to drop. Rowan Pike stood there, her breath puffing slightly in the 40-degree air, looking at my brother with a mixture of boredom and mild annoyance. She did not look like a woman who had just driven 3 hours to a muddy farm. She looked like she had just stepped out of a boardroom in Manhattan. Evan blinked. His brain was clearly misfiring, trying to reconcile the failing farm narrative he had constructed with the presence of a woman wearing a suit that likely cost more than his car. Marrow and Slate, Evan repeated, the name rolling off his tongue like a foreign object. I have heard of it. The hotel group. Hospitality group, Rowan corrected, her voice crisp. We own 12 properties across the tri-state area, including the Avery in downtown Boston and Stonehouse in the Berkshires. Perhaps you have dined with us. She did not wait for an answer. She turned her head slightly, locking eyes with the county assessor. Mr. Mercer, she said, nodding again, I did not expect to see you in the field. I assume the county received our adjustment filing for the distribution center. Caleb Mercer was staring at her with wide eyes. He took a step back, pulling the clipboard against his chest as if it were a shield. Ms. Pike, yes, I wait. I just signed off on the tax abatement for your new logistical hub in Summit County last week. You are the signatory on the Marrow and Slate holdings. I am, Rowan said. Caleb looked at me. Then he looked at Rowan. Then he looked at the gleaming stainless steel machinery around us. The color drained out of his face as the realization hit him. You are a client of mine, Caleb said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Marrow and Slate is one of the largest property taxpayers in the district. We are, Rowan agreed. And Daisy Martin is one of our largest suppliers. So you can imagine my concern when I arrive for a scheduled compliance audit and find a strange man screaming at my lead vendor and threatening to seize my inventory. She turned back to Evan. Who are you again? Evan straightened his tie, trying to salvage his dignity. I am Evan Martin. I am the attorney for the estate, and this is a family matter. We are executing a foreclosure on a non-performing asset to satisfy a debt. This farm is insolvent. Rowan laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, devoid of humor. Insolvent? She walked past him, her heels clicking on the epoxy floor, and came to stand next to me. She did not hug me. We did not do hugs. She extended a hand, and I shook it firmly. Good morning, Daisy, she said. The Alpha Lot sample you sent on Tuesday had a Brix rating of 14. Chef Eleanor is demanding we lock in the entire harvest for the winter menu. She says the micro-wasabi profile is unparalleled. I can allocate 60% of the yield to Eleanor, I replied, keeping my voice professional. But I have promised the rest to the Ritz-Carlton Group, unless you want to renegotiate the exclusivity clause. We will talk numbers, Rowan said. But first, I need to verify the cold chain logs for the last quarter. We cannot have legal disputes interrupting the supply of premium garnish. Evan made a noise that sounded like a choking cat. Exclusivity clause. The Ritz-Carlton. What are you talking about? She grows lettuce. Caleb Mercer stepped forward. The assessor was no longer the passive observer. He was looking at the room with new eyes. He looked at the blast chiller. He looked at the filtration system. He looked at the labeling machine that printed QR codes. "This is not a farm," Caleb said, his voice taking on a frantic edge. "This is a Tier 1 commercial distribution node." He turned to me. "Ms. Martin, when you said you had contracts, you meant commercial supply agreements with national chains." "I did," I said, "and I meant multi-year agreements with penalty clauses for interruption." "I need to see them," Caleb said. "Now. This changes everything. If this land is generating commercial revenue at that scale, I cannot appraise it as agricultural fallow. The valuation methodology is completely different." "No," Evan shouted. He stepped between Caleb and me again, but this time his confidence was brittle. "You do not look at anything. This is a trick. She brought her friend here to play act. There is no way this junk heap is supplying marrow and slate. It is a lie." Rowan sighed. She reached into her leather portfolio and pulled out a thick document bound in heavy blue paper. She slapped it onto the stainless steel sorting table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "This," Rowan said, pointing a manicured finger at the document, "is the master procurement agreement between Marrow and Slate Hospitality and Martin Agritech, LLC. It is a binding contract for the provision of specialty aromatics and hydroponic greens for a term of 3 years. She flipped it open to the signature page. "Signed by me, notarized, and currently active." Caleb moved toward the table. Evan tried to block him, but Caleb simply walked around him. The assessor bent over the document. He ran his finger down the page. "The monthly retainer," Caleb read aloud, his voice shaking slightly. $12,000 base, plus unit costs per crate." "That is the base," Rowan corrected. "That just reserves the greenhouse space. The actual product billing is separate." $12,000 a month, Caleb whispered. "That is $144,000 a year, just for the reservation fee. And that is just one client," I added calmly. "I have 3 others on similar terms." Evan's face had gone the color of old ash. He looked at the document, then at the junk around him. He began to do the math in his head. If I was pulling in $500,000 a year in revenue minimum, then the debt he claimed I owed was laughable. More importantly, if the farm was generating that kind of cash flow, the business valuation was not $50,000. It was likely in the millions. "This is impossible," Evan stammered. "You drive a 10-year-old truck. You dress like a laborer." "It is called reinvestment, Evan," I said. "I put the money into the business. Unlike you, I do not wear my net worth on my wrist." My mother spoke for the first time since we entered the shed. Her voice was small, trembling. "Daisy, you are rich." I looked at her. She did not look proud. She looked terrified. "I am successful, Mother," I said. "There is a difference. I built something real. Something you and Evan were ready to bulldoze because you were too arrogant to ask a single question about what I actually do." "But the debt," Diane whispered. "The family debt if the farm is worth this much." "If the farm is worth this much," Caleb interrupted, straightening up, "then a foreclosure for a disputed 5-figure debt is grossly inappropriate. A judge would never grant a seizure order on an asset with this much equity. He would order a lien at best." Caleb turned to Evan, and his expression was no longer mild. It was furious. "You told me this was a distressed asset," Caleb said. "You told me it was a salvage operation. You filed a motion claiming the property was abandoned and failing to expedite the auction process." "It looks abandoned," Evan yelled, gesturing wildly at the walls. "It is a shed. It is a concealed high-value enterprise," Caleb snapped. "And by misrepresenting the nature of the asset in your filing, you have wasted county resources and potentially committed perjury on the affidavit of condition." Caleb pulled his phone from his pocket. I am calling the district supervisor. I cannot complete this assessment alone. I need a commercial forensic accountant and an industrial zoning specialist. This is way above my pay grade. Do not make that call, Evan hissed. We can settle this. We can. I am making the call, Caleb said, walking toward the exit to get a better signal. And I am putting a hold on the valuation report. This auction is not happening in 30 days. It is not happening at all until we untangle this mess. Rowan watched Caleb leave, then turned a cool smile on Evan. You really should have done your homework, she said. Just a few vegetables. You said, It is, Evan insisted, though he was sweating profusely now. It is just fancy grass for rich people. One contract, Rowan said, tapping the blue binder on the table. Just one of our quarterly orders from Daisy is worth more than the gross annual revenue of your entire law practice. Mr. Martin, I looked you up on the way here. Your firm handles slip-and-fall cases and minor estate disputes. Daisy is handling the food security for a $100 million hospitality empire. She leaned in closer to him. You are standing in a gold mine, holding a shovel, and complaining about the dirt. Evan looked at the binder. He looked at me. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He realized he was not just losing the farm. He was losing the narrative. He was losing his leverage. And he was beginning to realize that the sister he thought was a helpless failure was actually the most powerful person in the room. Mom, Evan said, turning to Diane. We need to go. We need to regroup. But Mom was not moving. She was staring at the reverse osmosis machine, at the lights, at the sheer scale of the operation she had been told was a failure. You lied to me, she said to Evan. Her voice was quiet, but in the acoustic clarity of the cold room, it was deafening. You said she was starving. You said she needed us to intervene before she lost everything. She was hiding it, Evan snapped. How was I supposed to know? You are a lawyer, I said. You were supposed to check. Rowan picked up the binder and handed it to me. I believe you will need this for the next part of the show. Daisy, I brought the rest of the historicals in the car. Thank you, I said. Evan grabbed his mother's arm. We are leaving. Now. Not yet, I said. We are not done. I am done with this charade. Evan spat. You think because you have one fancy client you are safe. I still have the debt instrument. I still have your signature. You owe the family $700,000. Daisy. And I will drag this through court until you are bankrupt from legal fees. 700,000? Rowan asked, raising an eyebrow. Is that all? She looked at me. Daisy, if you need a bridge loan to make this pest go away, Marrow and Slate has a vendor support program. We could advance you that against next year's harvest by close of business today. Evan froze. The blood left his face completely. His greatest weapon, financial pressure, had just been neutralized in 2 sentences. I do not think that will be necessary, Rowan, I said, opening the binder to the section I had prepared the night before. Because I do not actually owe the money, and I think Evan knows that. I looked at my brother. Right, Evan. He did not answer. He was watching Caleb Mercer walk back into the room, phone in hand. Supervisor is on the way, Caleb announced. And he is bringing the county sheriff. Evan flinched. The sheriff, because, Caleb said, staring at Evan with cold, bureaucratic judgment. When an officer of the court files a fraudulent description of property to accelerate a seizure, it is a crime, and I want a witness for what happens next. The air in the room shifted again. It was no longer a business dispute. It was a crime scene, and Evan was the one holding the smoking gun. Caleb Mercer retreated to the hood of his county sedan, spreading his paperwork out like a battlefield commander reviewing maps. He was on the phone. His voice a low rumble that I could not quite make out, but the stiffness of his posture told me he was not discussing the weather. He was discussing fraud. That left me alone with the wolves. Evan watched Caleb walk away, his eyes darting nervously between the assessor and the open door of the processing shed where Rowan was calmly checking inventory tags on a pallet of microgreens. The realization that he had stepped into a bear trap was setting in, but Evan was a litigator. His instinct when cornered was not to surrender, it was to cut a deal. He turned to me, his face rearranging itself into a mask of fraternal concern. He reached out and took my elbow, trying to steer me away from the open door, away from Rowan's hearing range. I pulled my arm back sharply. "Do not touch me," I said. "Daisy, listen," Evan hissed, keeping his voice low. "We need to pivot. Things have gotten out of hand. I did not know about the scope of your operation. Okay, I admit that. I was working with incomplete information." "You were working with lies," I corrected. "Let us not get bogged down in semantics," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "The point is, the situation has changed. If Mercer files a report saying this is a multi-million-dollar commercial enterprise, the tax implications alone will bury you. You do not want that. I do not want that." "I can afford the taxes," I said. "Can you afford the audit?" He flinched but pressed on. "Look, here is the solution. We pause the foreclosure. I will withdraw the motion for the auction today. In exchange, we sign a settlement agreement right now. You agree to assume the family debt, the $750,000, but we structure it. Low interest, favorable terms. You pay it off over 10 years out of your business revenue. Everyone wins. The family gets saved. You keep your farm, and we avoid a messy legal battle." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. It was a promissory note. He had brought it with him, just in case. "Just sign this," he said, holding out a gold pen. "It is a standard acknowledgement of debt. It just formalizes what you already owe. We can notarize it later. Just sign it, and I will get Mercer to back off." I looked at the pen, then I looked at him. The audacity was breathtaking. He knew the original document was a forgery. He knew it would not hold up to scrutiny. So his plan B was to panic me into signing a real document, one that would legally bind me to his gambling debts and retroactively validate his lies. "You think I am stupid," I said. It was not a question. "I think you are pragmatic," Evan urged. "Daisy, be reasonable. The alternative is a war you cannot afford." "I do not owe the family $750,000, I said, my voice rising just enough to carry, "and I am not signing a confession to cover your tracks." "It is not a confession," Evan snapped. "It is a guarantee you signed the original one 5 years ago." "No," I said. "I did not." I stepped closer to him. "I know about the cut and paste job. Evan, I know you lifted my signature from the Northbridge Employee Handbook scan. I know about the pixel degradation on the D. And I know Arthur Sterling, the forensic document examiner I hired yesterday, is going to testify that the signature is a digital fabrication." Evan's face went slack. The confident lawyer veneer cracked, revealing the frightened gambler beneath. "You hired an examiner. He is comparing the exemplars right now." I lied. The report was already done, but fear was a better motivator than certainty. "When he submits his affidavit to the court, you won't just lose the case. You will be facing felony charges for uttering a forged instrument." My mother, who had been listening in stunned silence, stepped forward. She looked smaller than she had this morning. The grandeur of her martyrdom was deflating under the pressure of reality. "Daisy," she said, her voice trembling. "Stop it. Please. Why are you doing this? Why are you trying to destroy your brother?" "I am defending myself, Mother," I said. "He came to my home to take my land." "It is for the family," she cried out. "He is your brother. Even if the paperwork was messy, the need is real. We are drowning. Daisy, the investment went bad. We could lose the house. We could lose everything. Does that not matter to you?" "It matters," I said, "but not enough to let you rob me." "It is not robbery," she insisted, clutching her handbag with white knuckles. "It is sharing the burden. That is what families do. You have all this." She waved a hand vaguely at the high-tech facility. "You are sitting on a gold mine, and you watched us struggle. You let us worry about money while you were hoarding wealth in secret. I did not hoard anything, I said. I worked. I built this while you were telling everyone I was a failure, while you were ashamed of me. We were not ashamed, Diane said, tears welling in her eyes. We were worried. We thought you were lost. Is that why you hid the loan? I asked, cutting through her tears. If we are such a close family, why did I have to find out about the $750,000 debt from a UCC filing? Why did you bring Evan here like an executioner to ambush me instead of asking for help? Because we knew you would say no, Evan shouted. You were always selfish, always off in your own world. You think you are better than us because you play in the dirt. I think I am better than you because I do not steal, I retorted. Well, we had to do something, Aunt Gloria piped up. She had been hovering by the wall, looking terrified, but the tension had clearly short-circuited her filter. Diane told us you were destitute. Daisy, she said you were on food stamps. She said you were going to lose the place anyway for unpaid taxes. So Evan was just stepping in to save the equity before the government took it. The air left the conversation. I turned slowly to look at my mother. Diane looked down at her shoes. Food stamps, I whispered. She said you were living on welfare, Gloria continued, her voice high and defensive. She said you were mentally unstable and could not hold down a job, and that is why you were hiding out here. She said taking the farm was a kindness, a conservatorship, practically. It hit me like a physical blow. It was not just greed, it was character assassination. To justify their theft, they had to rewrite my history. They had to turn me into a charity case, an invalid, a burden. They could not steal from a successful businesswoman. So they invented a narrative where I was a helpless failure who needed to be saved from her own incompetence. I see, I said. My voice was very quiet. So the narrative was that I am a leech, and that gave you the moral license to be the heroes who put me out of my misery. It made sense at the time, Evan muttered, looking away. We thought we assumed. You assumed, a cool voice cut in from the doorway. Rowan Pike stepped out of the shed. She was holding a tablet, her expression one of polite, lethal incredulity. If Ms. Martin is on welfare, Rowan said, walking toward us, then the state has a very generous definition of poverty. My accounting department has wired nearly $400,000 to her operating account in the last 6 months alone. She stopped next to me, presenting a united front. In fact, Daisy is one of the most solvent, liquidity-positive vendors in our entire supply chain. If she was on food stamps, it was probably because she was researching the nutritional density of government subsidies for a white paper. Rowan looked at Diane. Your daughter is not a charity case, Mrs. Martin. She is a tycoon in work boots. And frankly, the only people in this circle who seem to be struggling with financial competence are the ones wearing suits. Evan's face turned a violent shade of red. He stepped toward Rowan, his hands balled into fists. You stay out of this, he snarled. This is private family business. You are just a vendor. I am a witness, Rowan corrected him, her voice dropping to absolute zero. And I am currently witnessing an attempt to coerce a signature on a debt instrument under false pretenses. I believe they call that extortion. I will sue you. Evans spat at me, ignoring Rowan. I will freeze your accounts. I will file injunctions against your harvest. I will tie you up in litigation for 5 years. I will make sure every cent you make goes to legal fees. You think you can embarrass me? I will burn this place to the ground legally before I let you win. Go ahead, I said. File the injunctions. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my phone. But before you do, you should know that I have already drafted a counter-complaint, I said, for fraud, abuse of process, and malicious prosecution, and I am attaching the forensic report on the signature. I took a step closer to him. And Evan, I am not just filing it with the civil court. I am sending a copy of the complaint and the evidence to the State Bar Association. Evan froze. The threat of losing money was one thing. The threat of losing his license was another. You would not, he whispered. You tried to take my home, I said. You tried to steal my father's legacy. You lied about me to the world. Why would I protect your career? I am your brother, he pleaded, his voice cracking. You were my brother when you walked in the door, I said. Now you are just a defendant. Before he could respond, Caleb Mercer walked back into the circle. The assessor looked tired. He had the heavy, resigned expression of a man who had just had a very long conversation with a very angry supervisor. He did not look at Evan. He looked straight at me. Ms. Martin, Caleb said formally, I have spoken with the county administrator. Based on the visual inspection and the documents provided by Ms. Pike, I'm placing an immediate hold on the foreclosure proceedings. He turned his clipboard around so we could all see the form he had been filling out. I have not finished the full commercial appraisal, Caleb said. But based on the infrastructure, the water rights, and the verified revenue streams, my preliminary valuation of this property, including the business enterprise value, is in excess of $4,500,000. Diane gasped. Gloria put a hand over her mouth. $4.5 million, Caleb repeated. As such, the motion to foreclose based on a debt of $750,000 is legally insufficient. The equity cushion is too large. The court would never order a sale. At most, they would order a repayment plan. Caleb turned his eyes to Evan. They were not friendly. However, Caleb continued, that is assuming the debt is valid, which, given the discrepancies in the filing and the conflicting statements I have heard today, is a matter I am flagging for judicial review. Flagging? Evan squeaked. I am submitting a report to the court, Caleb said, stating that the plaintiff, that is you, Mr. Martin, misrepresented the condition of the asset in a sworn affidavit. You called this a failing farm with no significant value. That is a material falsehood. Caleb closed his clipboard. The sheriff is on his way to take a statement. I suggest you stay right here. Evan looked at the gate. He looked at his car. He looked at the ruin of his plan. We are leaving, Evan said, grabbing his mother's arm. Now. Mr. Martin, I asked you to wait, Caleb warned. I am not under arrest, Evan shouted, panic taking the wheel. This is a civil matter. Come on, Mom. He dragged Diane toward the car. She was stumbling, looking back at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. She looked like she wanted to say something, an apology, a plea, an excuse, but Evan shoved her into the back seat. Daisy, Gloria cried out, not knowing whether to follow them or stay. Daisy, tell him to stop. Goodbye, Gloria, I said. They scrambled into the silver sedan. Evan reversed so hard, he nearly hit the fence post. He spun the wheel, gravel spraying everywhere, and tore out of the driveway like the devil himself was chasing him. We watched them go. The dust cloud rose in the still air, hanging there like the ghost of their departure. Caleb Mercer sighed and took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. I hate family cases, he muttered. They are always the messiest. I apologize for the drama, Mr. Mercer, I said. Do not apologize, he said, putting his glasses back on. You just saved me from signing off on a fraudulent auction. If I had sold a $4 million business for land value, I would have lost my job. He looked at the greenhouses. I still have to finish the assessment, though, and your taxes are going to go up. A lot. I know, I said. Send me the bill. Rowan stepped up beside me. She watched the dust settle on the road. You know he's going to try to sell the debt to a collection agency now, she observed. He is desperate. Let him try, I said. I have the forensic report. The debt is dead. $4.5 million? Rowan mused. I think Caleb lowballed you. He did not factor in the brand value of the Marrow and Slate Association. I will ask for a reassessment next year, I said. I looked at the spot where my mother had stood. The words she had said echoed in my mind. We thought you were lost. They had not thought I was lost. They had hoped I was lost, because if I was lost, they could take what was found. But I was not lost. I was right here, rooted in the ground I had saved. So, Rowan said, breaking the mood. About that exclusivity clause with the Ritz-Carlton. Are we going to talk about it, or do I have to arm wrestle you for the shiso? I turned to her and smiled. A real smile this time. Come inside, I said. I will make coffee. We can negotiate. The engine of the silver sedan was revving, a harsh mechanical whine that signaled Evan's desperation to escape. He had put the car in reverse, ready to tear up the gravel, but he had forgotten one crucial thing: bureaucracy. Caleb Mercer stepped off the loading dock and raised a hand, palm out, like a traffic cop. "Mr. Martin," Caleb shouted over the noise of the engine. "Turn off the vehicle. I cannot file the hold order without your signature of receipt. If you leave now, I will mark it as flight to avoid service, and the sheriff will pick you up at your office." The threat hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. Evan slammed his hand against the steering wheel. I saw him mouth a curse, his face distorted through the windshield. Then, the engine cut. The silence that rushed back into the valley was sudden and ringing. Evan stepped out of the car. He did not look at me. He marched toward Caleb, his movements stiff with suppressed rage. My mother and Aunt Gloria stayed in the back seat, huddled together like refugees from a storm. "Give me the pen," Evan snapped, reaching for Caleb's clipboard. "Let us get this over with." "Not just the pen," Caleb said, pulling the clipboard back slightly. He looked at his notes, his face set in stone. "I want to be absolutely clear about what you are acknowledging. Mr. Martin, by signing this, you are receiving the preliminary notice of a contested valuation." Caleb looked at the group of us Rowan, standing with her arms crossed, me, leaning against a crate of basil, and Evan, vibrating with impatience. "My preliminary assessment," Caleb announced, his voice projecting clearly across the yard. "Based on the standing inventory, the automated infrastructure, the commercial cold chain, and the deeded senior water rights, puts the value of this property at $4.8 million, and that is a conservative estimate." Evan froze. The pen hovered over the paper. 4.8, Evan repeated. A strange light entered his eyes. It wasn't relief. It was greed. The lawyer in him was already spinning the new data, looking for an angle. He straightened up, smoothing his jacket. A smirk began to tug at the corner of his mouth. "Well," Evan said, his voice changing from panicked to predatory, "that is unexpected, but if the estate is worth nearly $5 million, then surely liquidation is even more imperative. We sell the asset, pay off the $750,000 family debt, and Daisy walks away with a nice check. It is the logical move. The higher the value, the more sense it makes to cash out." He turned to me, spreading his hands as if he were offering me a gift. "See, Daisy, this works for everyone. You get millions. We get the debt cleared. Why are we fighting? Let us just agree to the sale." "The debt," Caleb interjected, his voice dry, "must be validated before any sale can be ordered. A court will not liquidate a $5 million operational business to satisfy a debt that is currently under suspicion of fraud." "It is not fraud," Evan insisted, though his eyes darted nervously to the side. "It is a standard loan. She owes the family." "I do not owe the family a cent," I said. I pushed off the crate and walked toward them. I was done with the defensive. It was time to go on the offensive. "You are banking on the fact that Dad is not here to defend me," I said, stopping 3 feet from my brother. "You think because he is dead, you can rewrite history. You think you can turn his generosity into a shackle. Dad gave you that money," Evan sneered, "and Dad expected returns. He was a businessman." "He was a father," I said. "Something you seem to have forgotten." I reached into the inside pocket of my fleece jacket. I felt the rough texture of the manila envelope against my fingers. I pulled it out. It was old, the paper soft and creased, but the handwriting on the front was unmistakable. "Do you recognize this?" I asked. Evan looked at the envelope. He blinked. "That is Dad's handwriting." "He gave this to me the day he wrote the check for the land," I said. "I have kept it in a fireproof safe for 6 years. I never showed it to you because I thought I would never need to prove his love to his own son. I opened the flap and pulled out the single sheet of yellow legal pad paper. My hands were steady. I began to read aloud. Daisy, this check is not a loan, it is a seed. I worked 40 years in a job I tolerated so that you could do work you love. Do not pay me back. Pay it forward. Build something that makes you happy. If it fails, you are still my daughter. If it succeeds, it is all yours. Make it real. I lowered the paper. The silence in the yard was absolute. It is a gift letter, I said. In the eyes of the law, a clear statement of intent. There is no loan. There never was. Evan's face was pale, but he shook his head, desperate to deny the reality in front of him. That could be anything. It is just a note. It is not a legal contract. It does not supersede the debt agreement you signed. The debt agreement I did not sign, I corrected. You cannot prove that, Evan shouted, his voice cracking. It is your word against the document, and dead men do not testify. Actually, I said, sometimes they do. I reached into my pocket again and pulled out the black USB drive. I held it up. It caught the morning sun, a small, dark monolith of truth. Dad left voicemail messages, I said. He was bad at texting. Remember, he liked to talk. I walked over to the portable, rugged speaker we used in the processing shed to play music for the crew. I plugged the USB into the side port. I found this on an old backup drive 2 years ago, I said. From the month I bought the irrigation system, the same month you claim I signed a loan modification. I pressed play. There was a hiss of static, and then a voice filled the yard. It was warm, gravelly, and painfully familiar. Hey, Daisy girl. Just calling to see how the pipes are holding up. I know you are worried about the cost. But listen to me. Stop worrying about the money. The money I gave you is gone. Okay, it is an investment in you, not the dirt. I do not want it back. I just want to taste one of those tomatoes before I kick the bucket. You keep building. Love you. Kiddo. The recording clicked off. For a moment, nobody moved. The sound of my father's voice, so full of life and warmth, seemed to hang in the air, a stark contrast to the cold, jagged greed of his son. I saw my mother in the back seat of the car. She had her hands over her face. Her shoulders were shaking. Evan stood frozen. His mouth was slightly open. He looked like a man who had been punched in the gut. He knew, as a lawyer, exactly what had just happened. The letter established intent. The audio recording corroborated it. The forensic report on the signature would seal it. His case was dead. The family debt was a fiction, and he had just tried to use the court system to enforce a lie. Caleb Mercer cleared his throat. The sound was loud in the quiet yard. Ms. Martin, Caleb said, his voice formal and serious. I am going to need a copy of that letter and that audio file. Why? Evan whispered. Because, Caleb said, turning to face him, I have to attach them to my report to the court. This is no longer just a valuation dispute. This is evidence of a material misrepresentation of the title's encumbrances. Caleb took the clipboard back from Evan, who was holding it like a dead weight. I am flagging this file for immediate fraud review, Caleb said. Mr. Martin, I strongly suggest you retain your own counsel, because if you filed a foreclosure based on a debt you knew was fictitious, you are going to be facing sanctions from the Bar Association and possibly the district attorney. Evan took a step back. He looked at the house. He looked at the greenhouses. He looked at me. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified realization that he had bet his entire life on this bluff. And he had lost. Rowan Pike stepped forward. She placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that felt like armor. Mr. Mercer, Rowan said, Marrow and Slate will be happy to provide a notarized affidavit regarding Daisy's revenue history and business solvency. We can also provide legal support if Ms. Martin requires it to defend against these predatory filings. That would be helpful, Caleb said, making a note. You. Evan pointed a shaking finger at me. You set me up. You let me walk into this. I invited you for coffee, I said. You brought the court order. Suddenly, the back door of the sedan flew open. My mother stumbled out. She did not look at Evan. She walked straight toward me. Her face streaked with tears. Her makeup ruined. Daisy, she choked out. Daisy, please, stop this. I did not start it. Mom, I said. He is your brother, she wailed, grabbing my arm. He made a mistake. We all made mistakes, but you cannot let the police get involved. You cannot let him lose his license. It will destroy the family. The family? I asked, looking down at her hands gripping my sleeve. You mean the family that told everyone I was a failure? The family that planned to sell my home to pay for a bad investment? We were desperate, she cried. Daisy, please, you have so much now. Look at all this. You have millions. You can help us. Why do you have to be so cruel? Why do you have to shame us like this? Shame you. I stepped back, breaking her grip. You shamed me for 6 years, I said, my voice trembling with the first real anger I had let show. You told the neighbors I was crazy. You told the family I was on welfare. You let me eat Christmas dinner alone because I wasn't successful enough to sit at the grown-up table. You watched me struggle and you laughed. I pointed at the house. I built this alone, when I was cold. You weren't here. When the crop failed, you weren't here. Now that it is worth $4 million, suddenly we are family. We are your blood, she sobbed. Blood is a biological accident, I said. Loyalty is a choice. And you chose Evan. Evan had seen enough. He realized that the longer he stayed, the more evidence he was providing for his own prosecution. He was cutting his losses. Get in the car, Mom, he yelled. We are leaving. Evan, talk to her, Diane pleaded. It is over, Evan screamed. Get in the car. He grabbed her arm and practically threw her into the back seat. He scrambled into the driver's seat, not bothering with the seatbelt. He slammed the door and gunned the engine. The car lurched backward, tires spinning on the loose gravel. In his haste, he did not notice that his briefcase, which he had set on the roof of the car while signing Caleb's form, slid off. It hit the ground with a heavy thud, spilling open. Evan did not stop. He threw the car into drive and sped out of the gate, leaving a cloud of dust and his dignity behind. I walked over to the fallen briefcase. Papers were scattered across the driveway. Caleb and Rowan followed me. I knelt down and picked up a thick document that had slid out of a blue folder. It was not a legal brief. It was a contract. The title at the top read, Letter of Intent, Exclusive Option to Purchase. The parties listed were Apex Horizon Holdings, Evans Shell Company, and Sunray Logistics Group. I scanned the first page. It was an agreement to sell the Martin property for $1.2 million, contingent on the acquisition of the senior water rights. But it was the date that stopped my heart. The document was dated 3 months ago. Evan had sold my farm before he even filed the foreclosure. He had been planning this for a quarter of a year, while I was having Sunday dinner at their house, listening to them complain about the weather. He had been negotiating the price of my destruction. I stood up, holding the document. Mr. Mercer, I said, handing it to him. I think you should see this. Caleb took the paper. He read the header. His eyes narrowed. This is an intent to sell an asset he did not own, Caleb said. This proves premeditation. He wasn't trying to recover a debt. He was executing a flip. Is that illegal? Rowan asked. Combined with the forged debt instrument and the false affidavit. Caleb looked up, and his expression was grim. It is conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. And since he used the mail to send the foreclosure notice, it might be federal. I looked at the dust clouds settling on the horizon. He wanted to sell the water, I whispered. He didn't care about the land. He just wanted the water. Well, Rowan said, putting her arm around my shoulders. He is going to be in hot water now. I did not laugh. I felt a profound, hollowing sadness. I had won. I had saved the farm. I had proven my worth. but I had lost the last illusion that my family loved me. "Let us finish the paperwork. Mr. Mercer," I said, turning back to the house. "I have a harvest to get out." The document Evan had dropped in the gravel was not just a piece of paper, it was a map of his intent. I sat in my office, the blinds drawn against the afternoon sun, and ran the crumpled pages through my high-resolution scanner. I sent the file to Sarah, my attorney in Chicago, with a subject line that simply read, "The Smoking Gun." 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "He sold it," Sarah said. She did not say hello. Her voice was tight with the specific kind of professional outrage that good lawyers get when they see bad lawyers doing something stupid and illegal. "He actually entered into a purchase agreement for a property he does not hold title to. He sold it for $1.2 million, I said, looking at the figure on my screen. "Contingent on the water rights. He was going to stiff you," Sarah said. "He was going to foreclose for the fake $750,000 debt, pay off his own bridge loan, and then pocket the difference from this sale. He was going to walk away with nearly $500,000 of your equity. Daisy, this isn't just a property dispute anymore. This is a conspiracy to defraud." "Do we have enough to bury the motion?" I asked. "Daisy, we have enough to bury him," Sarah replied. "I am drafting the response now. We are not just asking for a dismissal. We are filing a cross-complaint for abuse of process and malicious prosecution, and I'm attaching this contract as Exhibit A for motive." While Sarah worked on the legal architecture of my defense, the second pillar of my counterattack arrived via encrypted email. Arthur Sterling, the forensic document examiner, had completed his analysis. I opened the PDF. It was 12 pages of microscopic details, but the conclusion was summarized in a single, devastating paragraph on page 1. Conclusion. The questioned signature on the familial debt guarantee exhibits static thresholding and pixel aliasing consistent with a low-resolution digital transfer. When overlaid with the known exemplar provided from the 2017 Northbridge Strategy Group records, the signatures are a 99.9% geometric match. In my professional opinion, the signature is not an original wet ink inscription, but a digital fabrication created via cut-and-paste manipulation. I stared at the screen. There it was. Science had caught up with Evan's lies. He had been so lazy, so arrogant, that he had not even bothered to trace the signature. He had just dragged and dropped it, assuming I would never have the resources or the spine to hire an expert. I forwarded the report to Sarah. "File it," I told her. "File everything." By Wednesday afternoon, the legal machinery had ground into motion. We filed our response with the county court. It was a heavy filing. We asked for an immediate dismissal of the foreclosure order. We asked for a permanent restraining order against Evan and my mother to prevent them from entering the property or contacting my clients. And most critically, we filed a motion for sanctions under the State Code of Civil Procedure, accusing Evan of submitting falsified evidence to the court. But the final blow came from an unexpected ally. Caleb Mercer submitted his report. Usually, county assessments take weeks, but Caleb was angry. He had been used as a pawn, and for a man who lived by the rigid code of bureaucratic procedure, that was unforgivable. He fast-tracked the filing. A copy appeared in my secure portal an hour after the courthouse closed. Property status, high-value commercial enterprise, estimated valuation, $4,800,000. Notes, the plaintiff's description of the property as a failing non-operational farm is factually incorrect and appears to be a deliberate misrepresentation intended to undervalue the asset for accelerated seizure. The assessor's office recommends a judicial review of the plaintiff's filing for potential abuse of procedural guidelines. The chessboard was set. I had the king, the queen, and the rooks. Evan was playing with a single pawn, and he had just realized it. But a wounded animal is dangerous, and my family knew how to fight dirty. On Thursday morning, the whisper campaign began. It started with a text from my cousin Mark, a man I had not spoken to in 3 years. "Heard you are trying to get Evan disbarred. Pretty ungrateful considering how much your parents helped you get started. Family solves things at home. Daisy, not in court. Then came a voicemail from Aunt Gloria. Her voice was shrill, oscillating between pity and accusation. Daisy, your mother is sick with worry. She says you have become greedy. She says you are sitting on millions of dollars and refusing to help the family out of a jam. How can you be so cold? After everything they did for you, Evan was spinning the narrative. He knew he could not win on the facts, so he was trying to win on sentiment. He was painting me as the villain, the secret millionaire who hoarded wealth while her family suffered, the vindictive sister who was destroying her brother's career over a misunderstanding. He was trying to use the shame of the small town against me. He wanted me to feel the pressure of the community, to buckle under the weight of being the bad daughter. But he had miscalculated one thing. People in our town liked gossip, but they liked money more. By noon, the tone of the messages shifted. The rumor of the $4 million valuation had leaked. A second text from cousin Mark. Wait, is it true about the solar lease? Did Evan really try to sell the place out from under you for $1 million? The cracks were forming. Evan's story that I was a charity case could not survive the revelation that I was actually the richest member of the family. The sympathy was evaporating, replaced by a suspicious curiosity. They did not care if I was ungrateful. They wanted to know how I had made the money. Then, at 4 p.m, the silver sedan returned. I saw it on the security monitors. It stopped at the gate. This time, Evan was not driving. It was just my mother. She parked outside the gate, respecting the boundary I had set, and stood by the intercom. She looked small in the gray afternoon light. She was not wearing her usual armor of designer clothes. She was wearing a simple coat, and her hair was pulled back loosely. I buzzed the gate open. She walked up the long driveway. I met her on the porch. I did not invite her inside. The house was no longer a neutral ground. It was my fortress, and I would not let the enemy within the walls. Evan is not here, she said softly, stopping at the bottom of the steps. He is at his office. He is panicking. Daisy, he says you are going to ruin him. He ruined himself. Mom, I said. I am just the one turning on the lights. She looked up at me, and her eyes were red-rimmed. He is your brother. He made a mistake. He got over his head with this investment, and he thought he could fix it quickly. He did not mean to hurt you. He forged my signature, I said. He tried to evict me from my home. He sold my land to a developer behind my back. Which part of that was not meant to hurt me? Diane sighed, a long, shuddering breath. She reached into her purse. For a second, I tensed, but she only pulled out a single sheet of paper. I can fix this, she said. I told him I would talk to you. I told him that beneath all this hardness, you are still my daughter. She held the paper out. If you sign this, Evan will drop the lawsuit. He will withdraw the foreclosure today. It is a settlement. It says that we agree there was a misunderstanding about the debt, and in exchange for dropping the case, you agree to help the family with a small monthly stipend, just to cover the interest on the bridge loan until we can sell the coastal property. I looked at the paper. It was simple, deceptively simple. Mutual release and settlement agreement. It looked like a peace offering, but as I read the text, I saw the trap. Clause 4. The parties acknowledge the existence of prior financial obligations. If I signed this, I was acknowledging that there were obligations. I would be validating the lie that I owed them something. I would be retroactively making the fake debt real. And by agreeing to a stipend, I would be establishing a pattern of payment that they could later use to sue me for more. It was not a truce. It was a way to launder the forgery into a legitimate contract. He wrote this for you, didn't he? I asked. He just wants peace. Mom said, just sign it, Daisy. Put this behind us. If you sign this, we go away. You keep your farm. We keep our dignity. No one goes to jail. No one gets disbarred. Please. She looked at me with that gaze I had known my whole life. The look that said, be a good girl. Take the hit. Save the family. It was the look that had kept me silent for 6 years. It was the look that had made me hide my success because I knew it would threaten them. "You know," I said, my voice steady. "For years, I wondered why you were so hard on me, why you looked at my dirt-stained hands with such disgust. I thought it was because you wanted better for me." "I did," she whispered. "No," I said. "You wanted better for you. You wanted a daughter you could brag about at the country club. And when I didn't fit that mold, you threw me away." I took the paper from her hand. "And now that I have built something valuable, you do not want me. You want the value. You do not want a relationship, Mom. You want a transaction." I tore the paper in half, then I tore it again. "Go home, Mom," I said. "Tell Evan that if he wants a signature, he can get it on the deposition transcript." "Daisy," she gasped, her face crumbling. "If you do this, if you go to court tomorrow, there is no coming back. You will break this family apart forever. The family broke apart the day you decided my home was just an asset to be liquidated," I said. "I am just sweeping up the pieces." She stared at me for a long moment, waiting for me to crack, waiting for the guilt to work its magic. But the guilt was gone. It had burned up in the fire of their betrayal. She turned and walked back down the driveway. She walked slowly, like an old woman. I watched her go, and I felt nothing but a cool, clear relief. I went back inside. My phone pinged. It was an email from Rowan. Subject: contract confirmation, witness availability. Daisy. Attached is a formal affidavit confirming our commercial relationship, the revenue history, and the exclusivity of your supply chain. I have also included a letter of intent to renew for another 5 years at a 15% rate increase. My legal team has reviewed your filing. They say it is solid. I will be in the gallery tomorrow morning. If the judge asks, I am ready to testify that your brother is not just a fraud, but a nuisance to interstate commerce. Sleep well. The sharks are on your side this time." I smiled. It was the first time in my life I had felt protected, not by blood, but by competence, by people who valued me for what I did, not what I could give them. That night, the night before the hearing, I could not sleep. At 2 a.m, I pulled on my boots and walked out to the main greenhouse. The valley was dark, but the greenhouse was glowing softly from the standby lights. I walked inside. The air was warm and smelled of damp earth and growing things. The fans hummed their steady rhythm. I walked down the rows of basil, running my fingers over the leaves. For 6 years, I had hidden this place. I had treated it like a shameful secret. I had let my family believe I was failing because I was afraid that if they knew the truth, they would try to destroy it. And I was right. They had tried. But my mistake wasn't building it. My mistake was the silence. By hiding who I was, I had given them the space to invent their own version of me. I had let them define me as the victim, the failure, the child. I had fed their delusion with my humility. I stopped at the center of the greenhouse, looking up at the thermal screens. Tomorrow, in that courtroom, I was going to do something terrifying. I was going to stop hiding. I was not just going to win a lawsuit. I was going to introduce them to the real Daisy Martin, the Daisy Martin who ran a $4 million company, the Daisy Martin who commanded the respect of multinational corporations, the Daisy Martin who did not need a husband, or a father, or a brother to validate her existence. I realized then that the trial was not about the land. The land was safe. The evidence was overwhelming. The trial was a funeral. It was the funeral for the little sister they thought they knew. And I was ready to deliver the eulogy. I turned off the lights in the greenhouse, plunging the room into darkness. But I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. I knew exactly where I was going. The courtroom smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and the specific, acrid scent of anxiety. It was 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Judge Eleanor Vance sat behind the high bench like a statue carved from granite. She was a woman known for her impatience with frivolity, and as she leafed through the thick stack of motions on her desk, I saw a flicker of irritation cross her face. Evan stood at the plaintiff's table. He looked immaculate. He had clearly spent the weekend refining his appearance to project the image of the aggrieved, responsible executor. He wore a navy suit, a subdued tie, and an expression of reluctant duty. My mother sat in the gallery behind him, a handkerchief clutched in her hand, ready to play the role of the grieving widow forced to discipline a wayward child. I sat at the defense table. I was alone, save for my attorney, Sarah, who had flown in from Chicago the night before. But in spirit, I was not alone. Behind me, in the first row of the gallery, sat Rowan Pike. She was wearing a pinstripe suit that looked sharp enough to draw blood. Next to her was Caleb Mercer, the county assessor, who sat with his arms crossed, looking at Evan with the cold disdain of a bureaucrat who had been lied to. "Mr. Martin," Judge Vance began, peering over her reading glasses, "we are here on an emergency motion to stay foreclosure proceedings, coupled with a cross motion for sanctions alleging fraud. These are serious accusations. I assume you have a very good explanation for why this court's time is being consumed by a family squabble." Evan stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, it is quite simple. The defendant, my sister, owes the family trust a significant sum, $750,000. To be precise, the debt is 5 years old. We have been patient. We have been lenient. But the estate is now facing its own liquidity issues, and we were forced to exercise our right to liquidate the collateral, the farm to recover the principal." He paused, letting a note of sadness creep into his voice. "We take no pleasure in this. Daisy has struggled for years. The farm has been a failing enterprise. We are simply trying to close the books on a bad loan." "A bad loan," the judge repeated. "And do you have evidence of this loan?" "I do, Your Honor," Evan said, handing a folder to the bailiff. "Exhibit A is the familial debt guarantee signed by the defendant 5 years ago." The bailiff handed the document to the judge. She looked at it for a long moment, then she looked at me. "Ms. Martin," the judge said, "do you deny signing this document?" I stood up. My legs felt steady. The fear I had lived with for 6 years was gone, replaced by the cold clarity of the endgame. "I do, Your Honor," I said. "I did not sign that document. I have never borrowed money from the trust. The initial capital for my business was a gift from my late father." "A gift," Evan scoffed, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "Convenient." "Your Honor," my attorney Sarah interjected smoothly. "If I may direct the court's attention to Defense Exhibit B, it contains a notarized affidavit from Arthur Sterling, a certified forensic document examiner." The judge picked up the report. The room went silent as she read. I watched Evan's back. He was rigid. He knew what was in that report, but he had hoped his charm would outweigh the science. "According to this expert," Judge Vance read aloud, her voice flat, "the signature on the loan agreement is a digital fabrication. It is a 99% match to a signature from an employment document dated 2 years prior to the alleged loan. The pixelation suggests a scan and paste manipulation." She lowered the paper and looked at Evan. "Mr. Martin, care to explain why your sister's signature has digital artifacts consistent with a forgery?" "Expert opinions vary, Your Honor," Evan stammered, his smooth veneer cracking. "We maintain the document is genuine. Perhaps the copy quality is poor." "We also have Exhibit C," Sarah continued, "a handwritten letter from the late Frank Martin, stating explicitly that the funds were a seed and not a loan, and Exhibit D, a digital audio file recovered from the defendant's archives." Sarah nodded to the clerk, who pressed play on the laptop connected to the court's sound system. My father's voice filled the courtroom. It was ghostly and warm, echoing off the high ceilings. "The money I gave you is gone. Okay, it is an investment in you. I do not want it back." Evan closed his eyes. In the gallery, I heard a sharp intake of breath from my mother. "That establishes intent," Judge Vance said. "The funds were a gift. There is no debt. Therefore, there is no default." Even if it was a gift, Evan pivoted, desperate now. "The farm is failing. The estate has an equitable interest in protecting the land from tax seizure. We are acting as stewards." "Stewards," the judge repeated. She picked up another document. This brings us to the report filed by the county assessor. Mr. Mercer, she looked at the report, then at Evan. Mr. Martin, in your affidavit for the foreclosure order, you describe the property as dilapidated, non-operational, and having negligible commercial value. Is that correct? It is a matter of perspective, Evan said, sweating now. It is just plastic sheds. Mr. Mercer's report, the judge read, values the property at $4,800,000. He describes it as a Tier 1 high-intensity agricultural facility with commercial-grade cold chain infrastructure and senior water rights. He also notes that the property generated gross revenue in the mid-seven figures last fiscal year. The judge took off her glasses. Mr. Martin, did you visit the property before filing your affidavit? Yes, but... And did you miss the $4 million factory sitting on the land? She asked. Or did you lie to this court to expedite a seizure? I didn't know, Evan cried out. She hid it. She hid the value. She hid it. A voice from the gallery cut in. Rowan Pike stood up. She did not wait for permission. She simply commanded the room. Your Honor, Rowan said, my name is Rowan Pike. I am the Director of Procurement for Marrow and Slate Hospitality. We are the defendant's primary client. Ms. Pike, the judge said, not reprimanding her. Do you have standing here? I have a contract, Rowan said, holding up the blue binder. We have been doing business with Ms. Martin for 4 years. We signed with her precisely because she is the most transparent, reliable, and solvent operator in the region. The idea that this is a failing farm is not just a lie, it is a joke. Rowan looked at Evan with a withering glare. If Mr. Martin had bothered to ask a single question instead of assuming his sister was incompetent, he would know that Evan was sinking. He looked at the judge, then at me. He looked like a man drowning who realizes the lifeguard is holding an anvil. Your Honor, Sarah said, delivering the final blow. We have one last exhibit, Exhibit E, a document found in the plaintiff's possession 3 days ago. She handed the letter of intent to the judge, the one Evan had dropped in the driveway, the contract to sell my farm to the logistics company. Judge Vance read it. Her face hardened into a mask of pure judicial fury. This is a sales contract, the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet. Dated 3 months ago, between Apex Horizon Holdings, your shell company, Mr. Martin, and a third-party developer. She looked up. You attempted to sell property you did not own. You fabricated a debt to create a pretext for foreclosure. You lied on a sworn affidavit about the property's condition. And you intended to pocket the difference between the foreclosure amount and this sale price. It was a contingency. Evans squeaked. Just exploring options. It was fraud, Judge Vance said. She slammed the file shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The plaintiff's motion for foreclosure is denied with prejudice, she ruled. The cross motion for dismissal is granted. Furthermore, I am granting the defense's request for a permanent restraining order. Mr. Martin, you are barred from coming within 500 yards of the defendant or her property. She wasn't done. Given the egregious nature of the evidence, the forged signature, the false affidavit, and the predatory intent, I am referring this entire file to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into real estate fraud. And I am sending a formal complaint to the State Bar Association regarding your fitness to practice law. Evan grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. His career was over. His reputation was incinerated. But the family, my mother wailed from the gallery. She stood up, tears streaming down her face. Your Honor, please, he is my son. He was just trying to help. We are a family. You cannot ruin him like this. Judge Vance looked at my mother. There was no pity in her eyes, only fatigue. Madam, the judge said, this is a court of law. We adjudicate facts, not feelings. And we certainly do not adjudicate based on who sits at your dinner table. Your son attempted to use this court as a weapon against his own sister. If that is how your family operates, then I suggest you seek counseling, not legal remedy. She banged the gavel. Case dismissed. Court is adjourned. The bailiff moved toward Evan. Mr. Martin, you will need to sign these acknowledgement forms before you leave. Evan signed with a shaking hand. He did not look at me. He gathered his papers, shoving them messily into his briefcase, and hurried toward the exit. He looked small. He looked like a child who had been caught stealing from the cookie jar, only to realize the jar was filled with scorpions. My mother remained standing in the aisle. As I gathered my things, I turned to look at her. For the first time in my life, she was not looking at me with judgment or disappointment. She was looking at me with shock. She was looking at the woman in the work boots who had just commanded a team of high-powered lawyers and executives. She was looking at the daughter who had built a multi-million-dollar empire right under her nose. She took a step toward me. Daisy. I did not step back. I just stood there. You have millions, she whispered, as if that was the only part she had understood. You built all that. I did, I said. And you never told us, she said, a note of accusation creeping back in. You let us think. I let you think what you wanted to think, I said, because it was easier for you to believe I was a failure than to accept that I did not need you. I am your mother, she said, her voice cracking. Then be a mother, I said. Go help Evan. He is going to need a good criminal defense attorney, and I suspect he is going to need a loan. I turned my back on her. Goodbye, Diane. I walked out of the courtroom. I walked past Evan, who was arguing with the bailiff in the hallway. I walked past Aunt Gloria, who was hiding in the bathroom. I walked out into the bright, clear sunshine where Rowan and Caleb were waiting. Rowan held up a hand for a high five. I slapped it, hard. Drinks? She asked. Coffee, I said. And a pen. We have a contract to renew. 3 hours later, I was back at the farm. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the valley. The greenhouses were glowing, the vents opening to catch the evening breeze. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Evan had slapped down the foreclosure notice just a few days ago. The wood still held the memory of that violence, but I was scrubbing it clean with new memories. Rowan sat across from me. The shark suit was gone, replaced by jeans she kept in her trunk for site visits. Between us lay the new contract. 5 years, Rowan said, tapping the paper. Exclusive rights to the shiso and the micro-wasabi, first right of refusal on any new experimental crops, and a 20% price adjustment to reflect the market reality. 20%, I mused. You are generous. I am protecting my supply chain, she said, grinning. I cannot have my star grower distracted by lawsuits. I need you focused on the chlorophyll. I picked up the pen. It was a cheap ballpoint, not a gold fountain pen like Evan's. It was the pen of a worker. I signed my name, Daisy Martin, and this time, I made sure to put the tiny invisible dot inside the loop of the Y, just in case. Done, I said, sliding the paper across the table. Done, Rowan said. She put the contract in her bag. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a 3-hour drive back to the city. And I believe you have a harvest to supervise. I do, I said. I walked her to her car. We shook hands affirm, equal grip. You know, Rowan said, leaning out the window before she drove off. They are going to try to come back. When the money runs out, when Evan gets disbarred, they will come back knocking. Let them knock, I said, looking at the heavy steel gate I had installed at the entrance. The locks on this place are industrial grade, and so am I. She laughed and drove away, her taillights fading into the dusk. I stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the silence. It was not the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the silence of peace. I went inside. I locked the front door. I slid the deadbolt home with a heavy, satisfying thunk. I was not locking myself in. I was locking them out. I walked to the fridge. The foreclosure notice I had pinned there was gone. In its place, I pinned the first page of the new marrow and slate contract. I made a cup of tea, sat down by the window, and watched the lights of my greenhouses hum with life in the darkness. My father was right. I had made it real, and the world had answered. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a long road from that first foreclosure notice to the final gavel. But justice tastes sweeter than any vegetable I have ever grown. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a farm, a city, or somewhere in between? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and if you enjoyed seeing a greedy brother get exactly what he deserved, please hit that like button, subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need a little victory in their lives. See you in the next one.